It is time for Around the 412 with Smitty and Tyler.
Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I'm Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host Smitty. Follow us on all of our social medias at Around the 412 over on X, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook. Also, go check out our YouTube. Go subscribe to us there. Leave a like on the channel. Let us know in the comments any questions you have about any of the Pittsburgh sports teams, and let us know what you like, what you're seeing. Today is our Penguins episode, and we haven't recorded a Penguins episode post-trade deadline, post-draft, anything like that. Or not trade deadline, excuse me, free agency. Sorry, trade deadline was a long time ago. But we haven't recorded a Penguins episode, so we thought it was a good time to get our buddy Jesse Marshall on here, who writes for The Athletic, McKeens Hockey. He's been on here several times. If you know anything about the Penguins, you know who we're talking about. Jesse, thank you for coming on. You're the prodigal son of Ambridge, PA. We always love to have you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate
that. True? Is that true?
I'm trying to think of who my competition is, and I got to be honest with you, I'm pretty sad.
he might be the prodigal son.
Pretty sad. Yeah.
Jesse, I want to take it way back and start with the one transaction that has taken place that we did talk about on our last Penguins show. Alex Nedeljkovic coming back on a 2-year deal. And I want to start there because, at least for me, it kind of put the seed in my mind. And I'm not saying this for sure isn't going to happen, but it didn't happen in the timeline that I thought it would, that Tristan Jarry wouldn't be back. I thought we could see a trade take place, whether it was on the draft or like right before free agency, somewhere in there. What is your take on Alex Nedeljkovic coming back? And do you think that they are just going to run it back with the same goaltending duo?
I mean, well, it certainly looks like they may not have a choice if there's not a suitor for Tristan Jarry. And here's the problem, Zach. Like, you get to a point where if you make this move now, if you find a suitor for Tristan Jarry today, you have to find another goalie. You have to. You can't, in my opinion, roll into the season with Nedeljkovic and Blomqvist. Blomqvist, that would be his first taste of NHL experience. I think he had a great year last year. I'm very complimentary of this kid. I think he's ready to be an NHL backup, right? But the problem here is that Alex Nedeljkovic has never, in any stretch of his career, put together a really long period of good play. That would be, something you could rest on to say, like, I feel like this guy could be a starter. So that would be a huge gamble. And I don't think it'd be one that Kyle Dubas would really be wanting to make. So I don't think you can make a deal for Tristan Jarry and ship him out unless you've got a backup plan in place to get another goalie in short order. And let's be honest, if that goalie's John Gibson, you have not solved your problem, right? Like, that's the name that starts flying around all over the place. But I feel like you honestly could be worse than you were last year. And I know that, like, there's an affection to John Gibson because he's from Pittsburgh and people want that reunion, but, like, don't think about John Gibson in 2015. Think about him in 2024. Right? I know the Ducks are bad, but we can account for that in the stats, right? We can account for how bad the Ducks were and look at his performance in a vacuum, and it's just not great. It's just not great. So that, to me, is not the home run swing that's going to fix this issue. But if they run it back, the one thing you can hang your hat on is that you can get longer stretches of play out of Nedeljkovic. I hate to say this, but it's true. The Tristan Jarry wheels are going to fall off at some point during the year, right? I mean, like, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, won't get fooled again. Like, I think the proof's in the pudding here, right? Like, there's always something that happens. Whether he could have an all-star start to the year, go to the all-star game, and then come back and just completely be a different player. So you have to have a viable backup. You have to have somebody that you can put in and rely on. And I think Nedeljkovic was good enough last year that they felt like he could be that guy. I will say I think his performance last season is slightly overrated, because the team won the games. That doesn't necessarily mean the goaltending was really good, right? Like, wins is not a goaltending stat, but he did enough, right? He did enough to get it done where Tristan Jarry just simply was not, period. It's to the point that Mike Sullivan wholly trusted Nedeljkovic to do the job. So, that ecosystem, to me, isn't one that puts you back in the playoffs, but it's also, status quo, I guess, maybe isn't so awful considering what we saw last year.
Well, I feel like this is the same conversation we've had with goalies for the past at least 3 seasons that I can remember. Maybe not last season because Nedeljkovic was new, but I feel like with the Casey DeSmith, Tristan Jarry talk, it's more the same. And I don't think it's a 1-for-1 comparison, but we're kind of having the same conversation that we were having then. Like, should they run it back with the same tandem? Should they have gotten a different backup? Should they have traded Jarry sooner? Like, Do you think that there was even a possibility that they could have gotten a better backup in free agency or a trade if they wanted to, or was this kind of like writing on the wall that they were always going to do this?
I think this is the safest and easiest option for them because they had a good body of work to go off of in terms of like in-house video, right? Like they knew what they were getting in this option. Whereas some other guys that were out there, maybe you feel a little less certain about what they can provide you if needed to be called upon for a 10-game run, right? You are correct though, Tyler. I do want to point that out. Like, I think what people forget about Casey DeSmith is there's one, I think going back to the most recent year before he was let go, that he was unplayable for the first 60% of the season. I mean, every time Casey DeSmith played, it was disastrous. And then all of a sudden, like this light switch went off and he had a stretch of like 5 good games leading up to the trade deadline. And everyone's like, oh, we don't need a backup anymore. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like short-term memory here. But yeah, I think it is very much a microcosm of the situation they've just been staring at really now for the last, 3-4 years. I think it's not been something they found a permanent long-term solution to. I don't know that Joel Blomqvist is that permanent long-term solution yet. I want to stress that I think he's very good. I think he's good. I'd like to see him at the NHL level before like making any sweeping generalizations like that. But I think that's what bums me out a little bit is that we might not get that now. Injuries happen, right? Like, things happen. He might still get a taste. But I was excited to see what was in there, and we still might. But I think his season didn't end so well. Like his playoff performance was kind of like fart noise. So I think that set people back on him a little bit and like soured the taste in their mouth. But that's such a small sample to me, and I don't think the team was particularly good during the playoffs as a whole. But I do hope we get to see him this year because I think there's very much potential there. And he reminds me very much of like a Matt Murray, right? He's very stoic in that. You don't see him like flopping around out of control, in that sort of wild flurry style, right? Very controlled guy, controls the tempo, kills a lot of pucks, plays it in a fair, it doesn't make you panic. How about that when he goes behind the net to play the puck? So there's something to build off of. So I hope that becomes a solution for them, but I'm super hesitant to even indicate that before we see him in the NHL at all.
Let me ask you this. They don't bring, and it's obviously a hypothetical, it's not going to happen. They've already brought him back. They wouldn't have brought back Nedeljkovic. Would you have felt okay about Jari and Blomqvist being the duo or no, because of the track record we've had with Jari?
Exactly. Yeah. It's Tristan Jari alone that gives me the jitters a little bit. Just the unreliability, the inconsistency. He's never really put that full year together. The injury history is getting rich. That's a concern to me. I was concerned when they put that deal on the table for him. I'm in the camp that like I hate term for goalies unless you're talking about one of maybe 3 guys in the league, right? That are like really, really clear-cut, outstanding goaltenders. It was just wild to me and almost unnecessary to give Jari that term in what was ultimately kind of a competitive market for goalies at the time, right? Competitive in the sense that there was a lot of things moving via trade and in free agency, and the options seemed to be like pretty extensive, right? So I don't know if it's the term that's scaring other teams away from this or if it's just the performance. Maybe it's a combination of both, but I don't get the impression that people were beating down the door to come get Tristan Jari. And there are teams that need goaltending help. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So I guess what would have been the solution to get Blomqvist NHL reps this year and just like a 2-man team? Like, was that out there or no?
It would have, you'd have had to get a different starter. Yeah. That for me, you would have had to have gone out there and getting a bona fide number 1 with a proven track record that you knew was going to play in excess of 58 games.
So really, it was never going to happen.
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. I mean, I would be comfortable with other situations too, and that's the that would be my blue sky. But I think I'm always reticent at some level to fully sign off on somebody that's got 1 year pro North American experience, right? Full year of pro North American experience.
A lot of moving pieces, but we did see 2 other goalie trades take place, obviously. Would you have felt comfortable like if they would have shipped off Jari in a different situation, but brought in like a Jacob Markstrom, or obviously Linus Ullmark also shipped out of Boston? Like either of those 2, if there would have been, obviously, like I said, a Jari trade, you don't bring back Nedeljkovic, you bring in one of those 2 and then Joel Blomqvist, or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are both names. Markstrom, I'm not so quite sure about, but on the Ullmark side, I think you feel pretty comfortable with that. Yeah, so I would probably be one I would hang my hat on to say like I would feel more comfortable with Blomqvist being behind somebody like that.
Yeah, there would have had to been a lot of moving pieces, obviously.
Oh yeah, and then you rarely say that, but
Yeah.
and that's the hard part. Like I said, is I think they understand the situation that they're in, and that they cannot necessarily make a 1-for-1 goalie move. They can't just make a move for shipping Jarry out and then not address anything else. Like I said, it's a catch-22. It's a move that almost begets another move by necessity, and that's a difficult way to operate.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to dive into a couple of the trades here now. A trade that I did not see coming. The Penguins acquiring Kevin Hayes and a 2025 second-round pick from the Blues for future considerations. What do you make of this trade? Is this just them basically buying a second-round pick, but also getting a player they feel like isn't completely gassed? Like, it's not like a Jeff Carter situation. He can play in the bottom six.
Yeah, it's not a corpse. Let's just call it what it is. Yeah,
right.
I mean, yeah. So you heard him mention before the draft that he would be interested in situations where he could obtain a player and a pick, and that's exactly what the situation was. What I guess what question I end up with, right, is like, if you're going to play the same style of hockey, like if we're just to assume for a second that Mike Sullivan's not going to adjust anything, the system is the system. We're going to see what we saw before. I don't like Kevin Hayes like really fits into that. I think he's kind of like, probably, let's be honest, probably doesn't have the foot speed to play that up-tempo forecheck style. That being said, he's miles better defensively, I think, than some of his peers in this position will have been. I think overall, like you said, he's going to have a little bit more pop to his step. He's not a burner by any means, but I think he looks more lively. We'll put it that way. And as a utility style player that can plug in up or down, I think, depending on what the need is. So, it fits the bill for, I think, like a typical Dubas middle six guy. But I wonder about this mix. The one good thing I'll tell you is that analytically speaking, his assist playmaking rates are really high and his shot creation rates are really high, like shots from passes. And if he's going to play with a guy like a Poussin, I love that, right? Like that's potentially that's a really potentially great partnership there. So I'm excited about that. But the bar is so low, Zach. Like it's like you like, I don't know, Smitty, that we could dig a deeper basement in terms of like what we expect out of the bottom six. It's almost a negative. If you could provide like league average value, you're doing great. I mean, they've been lines that have just been almost wholly undeployable. So I don't think he's in that boat. I don't think he's like a player that you're embarrassed to trot out or you can't put out during certain face-off situations, defensive zone. I don't think that's it. I just think temper expectations is what I would say, right? You're getting a player who, again, falls into that older category, but can still set plays up and can still play decent D.
Older category, but their youngest center. So.
Right? How ironic is that?
Tyler, I made a little bit of a YouTube video talking about Kevin Hayes, but you were obviously not on for that, so we haven't gotten your thoughts on the transaction yet.
Well, I think pretty much the same as Jesse. Like, it doesn't really seem like a trade that is going to fit the Penguins system as long as Mike Sullivan is going to continue to play the same type of system that he wants to. I think as far as like the value you're getting, future considerations for an NHL caliber player that is at minimum going to be on par with what your bottom six has been, if not going to be better. That's probably the expectation, is that he'll be better because the bottom six has just been so bad. And then you get a second round pick as well. Like, I don't really have a problem with it at all. It just seems so random to me that it did happen. And this is actually something I wanted to ask Jesse, just because you mentioned the type of style that Sullivan likes to play. Do you think that there's any chance that he will ever move away from that style, no matter who his roster is? Or do you think he is just so set in stone in his way that it doesn't matter who he's icing, he's still going to be playing the same style?
I mean, like we saw pockets of like this more reserved style last year. Like, go back to Colorado, they had an unbelievable game against them, like the 3/4 point of the season. They stole a couple West Coast points at the halfway mark, playing, what I thought was a little bit more of like a protect the red line style of hockey, as opposed to like this rock 'em, sock 'em, go get 'em on the forecheck style. But that didn't last. It didn't last. It seemed circumstantial in a way I can't explain. I don't know why it only appeared in pockets. And people have said to me, like, well, was it just them executing things the right way? I'm like, no, because it was a totally different approach to the game. So it's in there, right? Like, we've seen it in pockets. I don't think that it's been something we've seen for really long stretches of time. So there's going to be some different influences on the bench this year, right? Maybe that those different voices, and maybe a guy like a David Quinn comes in and with some new ideas. I certainly hope that's the case for the power play. But I don't know. I think though that if you look at the roster as currently constructed right now, it is one that does not fit the necessary style I think that they want to achieve systematically, right? Because realistically, like just to explain what that means, they love having 2 forecheckers, right? Not just a one guy up at the top of the play, like disrupting. They want to send 2 in. And that's the standard now. Look at what Florida just won the Stanley Cup doing. I mean, these are teams now that are very aggressive and love playing these up-tempo forechecks, but you've got to have the legs. You've got to have the legs, because if you commit 2 forecheckers to a play, it's like blitzing against Tom Brady when he can throw that ball so fast and get it, and you're trapped. Now you've got all these resources committed to blitzing, and there's nobody in coverage at all. it's kind of like the same thing with the Penguins now. They commit these forechecking resources that don't get the job done. They don't provide the requisite pressure. They don't get up there and mix it up and cause these turnovers. And now all you've got are 2 forwards stuck up ice in the defensive zone or in the off, in the forecheck. The play's well beyond them now, and you're probably looking at an odd man rush or a 3-on-3 at best. So, again, I don't think the roster as currently constructed is super conducive to that. And I think that the hope is, for me anyway, we see a little bit more of, again, you don't have to go completely passive, but change where your focus is. Shift your focus from deep in the other team zone and back it up a little bit, right? Like worry about that red line and protect that middle of the ice. You still have players at forward that are really creative off the counter, right? Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, even a guy like Erik Karlsson, they'll kill you on the counterattack, right? I just don't think that their counterattack right now is in the right spot. I think it's a little bit too ambitious for the legs that they've got on the roster.
Yeah, I mean, we've said several times that it's not 2016 anymore. And you talked about how like Florida won with that style. The Penguins created this style. I mean, they might not have created it per se, but it's a copycat league. And ever since the Penguins did what they did in those back-to-back cups, everybody's just fed off of that.
Yep.
And it's not 2016 anymore. They don't have the same roster. And as much as it sucks, they should probably, I mean, we've said it before, like the Islanders' style of play might not be a bad style for the Penguins to look at with the roster that they have, because you're not going to be able to win. You're not young. You're not fast. You might as well be more responsible in the middle zones and have more defensive style to your play, because the offsetting forecheck and being able to get on the odd man rush, that's happening against you so often, while in the past you were able to do that for the same reasons. People weren't able to defend it. People weren't as fast. And now you are the team that's not as fast, and that's why it's happening against you. I feel like that is probably my biggest gripe with Mike Sullivan, is that he hasn't adjusted enough to his style yet. And that's not to say that he can't entirely, and he might do it this season. We don't know. But that's probably my biggest gripe I've had with him for the past probably 2 years now, is that you clearly have not had a fast or a similar style hockey team that you've won with in the past, but you've continued to stick it out and continue to skate the same way. It's just been very frustrating.
Yeah. And I think too, if you look at this team, there are really only 2 defensemen on the roster that you would consider to be like any level of defensive specialist, right? Like Jack St. Ivany, who from NHL years is 6 months old, and Marcus Pettersson. That's it, right? And I feel like that's a bad imbalance for a team that wants to play super aggressive, risky hockey. You have 2 defensemen you're really relying on to be able to hang back and clean those messes up, right? Those odd man rushes. Like we saw last year, that is not a Ryan Graves strength. It just isn't. It never has been. It's never been a part of his game. He's never been leaned on for that. And the way that this defensive unit is sort of aligned right now is I think they've had a lot of permission to go out there and play oppressive, risky, threatening hockey as far as pinching goes. But at the same time, they don't have the resources to save the day on the back end and bail the goalie out from that aggressive approach. So when you mix the forecheck together with the amount of pinching that they do, you're exposed everywhere. You're constantly in situations where there's a turnstile into your defensive zone, and you're like got the door wide open for teams to walk in. And that's really what the Penguins were last year defensively. They were a team that, pinched a lot and ultimately coughed up odd man breaks like they were candy on Halloween.
We turned, somehow we got from the addition of Kevin Hayes to just talking about the entire structure of the Pittsburgh Penguins. The next one that I wanted to bring up, though, Reilly Smith getting sent out of Pittsburgh to the New York Rangers, 2027 second round pick in a 2025 fifth round pick. Which do we know what the condition is on that? Because this is a conditional pick.
I don't know. Actually, that's a great question. I have to look into that. I've not even thought to check.
So we saw it was a second round pick and got super excited. I was like, there's no way. Obviously, should have known that it was kicked down the road a little bit. 2027 second round pick. But Reilly Smith, we thought it was a foregone conclusion that would be out of here. Started out really well, like really impressed early last season with the chemistry that him and Gino showed off the bat. I actually thought that he looked like a little bit of a game changer. What's going on, everybody? Smitty from Around the 412, and I just want to take a quick second to give a shout out to our folks at Game Changers. Their logo on the screen right now, right above my microphone. Over 2,000 different designs in their catalog. Luxury heavyweight material. I am wearing one of their shirts right now. Best vintage t-shirts in the game. Head over to gamechanger.la or pick6.la to pick up some shirts. And guess what? Use code AT412. Save yourself $10 on your order every single time. Again, gamechanger.la or pick6.la. Best vintage t-shirts in the game. Check them out. That was pretty good, wasn't it, Jesse?
Nobody does better. That's unreal.
Also, you could tell that was pre-recorded because I only had the mustache back when I recorded that. But anyways, Reilly Smith, I was very excited about the addition last year. Very excited by how it looked, the early returns of it last season. What in the world happened with Reilly Smith here, and what do we make of this trade and the return?
Yeah. I think if you look historically at his game, I think this is one of those situations where, like, the data and the video are married to each other pretty nicely. His strength was always in his connectivity plays, right? So, like, plays in the neutral zone, either he was carrying it across the blue line himself, or he was making plays with the puck, passes with the puck that were gaining zone entries for his team, right? And that was something he was a machine at. And at the beginning of the year last year, I think you saw a lot of that on display, or some of it at least on display for a couple of weeks. But I think ultimately that marriage with Malkin just never matriculated. And if you think about, like, the way that Malkin likes to play, he likes to carry the mail. Like, he likes to be the one that brings the puck across the line with possession. And his metrics in that bucket did not drop off last year, really. I mean, year over year is pretty much the same guy. And I think that kind of like robbed Reilly Smith's identity a little bit. And it ultimately, I don't think his place in that line was ever really made clear. He's kind of like for me, a space creating forward, like a Kunitz out there that can go retrieve pucks and do some of the dirty work along the walls. And I mean, we got a little bit of that, but there was just the goal scoring drought, especially like that early part of the year. He couldn't hit a broadside of the barn, unfortunately. And it never really leveled for him. So I think it was one of those situations where he left a really good team that he was a huge piece of, not a huge piece of, but an integral piece of for a couple of years, and came to the opposite coast and a different culture and a line that didn't really suit the way that he plays, and that homecoming never really gelled, right? Never really came together. So I didn't anticipate they'd get a player for him. I kind of thought they would. I don't know that I thought they'd get a second rounder. I know it's deferred, but that's still a pretty good get, all things considered, right? Ultimately a failed experiment for Dupes, but one that I think on paper we all thought had a great potential to work out, right? And I think even in the early portion of the season, it sort of was playing out the way we expected. But it just to me, I go back to those zone entry pieces and that the play of him between the blue lines metrically was just not there. It just wasn't there, and I think like his identity sort of got lost as a result.
The thing I was so excited about when we acquired him was his ability off the rush. And I just feel like it, like you said, it never really came to fruition for whatever reason. Around the 412 insider, Tyler Weeks dropped some knowledge on us a couple weeks ago about his desire to not be in Pittsburgh. So, and I don't know, I think that was pretty evident just watching him play. I'm not a big like body language guy. Like I hate when people read into that and try to say as much, but either way, so we'll see. But I agree about the second round pick. Like even if it's deferred a couple years, I think getting that back, getting the contract off the books, again, a player that I didn't expect them to have in 2024. But I guess the follow-up question to that is, I know that he wasn't spending all of his time in the top six, at times had moved down onto the third line, but like, is there somebody on the roster right now that takes that spot? Like, who do you think gets that jump with Reilly Smith's departure in ice time?
Yeah, so I think you have a couple candidates for this. I think the most likely one for me, I mean, we know Michael. So Drew O'Connor for me is the person who graduates here. And it's up to the top line alongside Sidney Crosby. I think your second line is pretty much going to be said as Michael Bunting was unbelievable with Malkin last year. That was a partnership that, like, for whatever reason, worked out really well. I like Brian Rust on the top line. I think that he's the closest thing to like the super poor man's Jake Gensel, right? Like, what I mean, like his ability
super poor
man's Jake Gensel, like, but his ability to play with
he's
Crosby,
shaking a can for change.
Yeah, right outside. Yeah. He's got that ability to play with Crosby off the rush, though, right? And read with him and understand like when to shoot, when to pass. I think his work down low around the net is really strong. That to me is a better setting for him than Ricard Raquel, who last year it never really seemed to come together. I think that putting him on that second line might be the best home for him. I just think that line with Bunting and Malkin is going to play more of his style of hockey and give him more of an opportunity to get into the front of the net and around the boards and win some puck battles, which is something he was really good at before he came here. And even really good at for a little bit while he was here. But last year, I think he just kind of lost that a little bit. And I don't know, in a similar fashion to Reilly Smith, it just seemed like he wasn't at home at all on some nights. So I think that partnership with Bunting and Malkin, playing him on the right there, could be potentially really good for him.
Can you gush about Michael Bunting real quick?
I'll say somebody that hated when we acquired Michael Bunting, I might be his biggest fan now.
Yeah. That was like, we're talking about these situations where players like didn't work out, but like Bunting is a phenomenal example of that. I like Carolina is like such an up-tempo team. They're super aggressive, right? They like play this super fluid, intense system, and he stuck out in that like a sore thumb. Like he's a wrecking ball, right? Like that's not his style of game at all. And I think that as soon as he came here and realized, how things were done and the style of play Pittsburgh was playing, it allowed him to go downhill a lot more. And that's where he's at his best. Downhill, going towards the net, being around the crease. He's got a little bit of that Ryan Malone in him, I think, right? Like he's kind of a similar player, and we know like that worked out pretty well with Gino in the past. So I think that partnership was just instantaneously good, and it opened up a little bit more space for Malkin to be able to go out there and do his thing too.
Yeah, it was an awesome.
Penguins won the Gensel trade, by the way. Carolina didn't win the cup, so they didn't win anything.
Yeah, we ended up with Michael Bunting and like a handful of prospects that suddenly became like some of the best ones you have in the system.
I was going to ask, not necessarily something that we planned on bringing up on here because so much time has gone past. But we did have a question. The one question that was related to the Penguins was kind of about the prospect system in general. But what do we make of the pool of prospects that they've kind of acquired through the Jake Gensel trade? We don't have to necessarily dive into the draft quite yet, but just, the pool overall.
And I think Ponomarev is somebody we should see next year. Legitimately. I mean, I think that we should see him to some level in the bottom six next season. And I don't know that he'll start there, especially given the way last year ended. But I think that ultimately that is a player I look at as somebody who can immediately step up in the event that there's a need in the middle. And at some point there's going to be, right? That their injuries happen. I look forward to that. I think he's somebody Pittsburgh's really going to like. It's a tough comp to give, but he's not out of class with the puck. Like when he has the puck on his stick, he's very confident. He carries the puck across the blue line a lot, but he plays so aggressively in the board-based areas. And like you see him like really bear down his shoulder and try to drive through guys, right? And he's got one arm on the stick, like managing the puck, and one arm off, like fending people off. Like that's where he's really at his best. I think his transition to pro game was really seamless. It was super seamless, and he's hit a lot of performances for the Canucks where he looked pretty good. So I look forward to that. I think that's probably the big. And then here's the thing: Ville Koivunen came out of nowhere for me, and a lot of people when he like arrives, people are like, "This kid's really good. Don't sleep on him." And it took a long time for me to get like good video of him because it's like it's tough in Europe sometimes when you don't have a lot of resources at your disposal. So I try. I mean, the thing for me again is just the speed. Like it's just raw speed and raw talent with he reminds me a lot of the type of player Valtteri Puustinen is. Very similar to me in terms of like shifty, good shot. It flies off the blade of the stick at a really unpredictable and volatile angle. It's difficult for goalies to get a sense of what's going on. The big thing is the transition in North America, right? And what happens with that? How does he handle it? I would never have described him as like a perimeter player. I think that's nonsensical. But it's a different game, right? You have to acknowledge it's just a different game. So I think I look forward to seeing more of him. But I think they did all right, man. Like, there was a lot of rumors flying around that night. One of them was that they were going for quality over quantity. And the other one was they were going for quantity over quality. And he ended up that being, that I think was what the case was, right? Like the cupboard was that bare that they had to get bodies in it. But it just so happened that the bodies they got are actually really not that bad at all.
I think what happened, honestly, for a lot of people within the fan base was we saw what a rumor deal was and like the names that were floated around there, the guys that were at the top of the Hurricanes prospect pool.
Yeah.
And then when it wasn't those names, there was a little bit of like disappointment.
Yeah.
So
I think that's probably it.
Like if we had never thought
Jackson Blakes of the world, right? Like they were
right. Like if that wasn't put out there, if we just got the return,
probably would have been okay with it. Yeah.
All right, let's dive into some of the free agents. And I don't know that this is in the specific order, but this is the way that they're listed here on Puckpedia. Matt Grzelcyk is the first one that we'll bring up here. Didn't end up dressing down the stretch for Boston a lot. I don't know. Jesse, if you want to try to talk me into this one, you can. Maybe you're in the same space as me. I wasn't a fan of the signing.
I'd have just held on to Chad Ruhwedel, to be honest with you. I think it's kind of like the same. You know what I mean? Like, what are we? These kinds of guys, right? They go through revolving doors sometimes because they're all in that same boat of like they're good puck movers that can get shots on net, but they're not necessarily really good at anything else. And so I don't think it's if he's going to play with Jackson Ivany, I think that's the kind of partner Jackson Ivany needs. So I think that potentially works out pretty well. But I don't think he's somebody that you can comfortably elevate the minutes of, right? You're not going to be moving him up throughout the year and like getting a big return on him playing an extra 5 to 10 minutes tonight. I think you have to watch the deployment, right? I think you have to be very, very careful about how you deploy him. But let's be honest, like Mike Sullivan's taken a lot of defensemen that you need to be careful about and made them a lot of money. Like Cody Ceci, great example. Justin Schultz, great example. Like these guys all came in broken and not super like well-performing defensemen that he managed and just sensically deployed them in a normal way based on their skill sets, and it worked out. And then they left here and made a lot of money. So for me, this is a signing that like you hope that happens here, and maybe you trade him at the deadline for somebody that needs a puck moving D. I think about Winnipeg, right? Like how badly could Winnipeg have used somebody like him last year to help work away through some of that forecheck they got eaten alive by because they don't have any puck moving defenseman besides Josh Morrissey. So like, a team like that, maybe you talk them into like giving you like a 4th rounder or something like that. I don't know. I think that's an asset that's potentially flippable in another way later on.
Yeah, like you said, at least he has that trump card of being able to move the puck. He has one thing about him that is redeeming. I guess going into the season, obviously not viewing him quite like that is just like a piece that we're automatically going to flip at the deadline. It's like a team that wants to win right now. There's a world where it works out, but on the surface going into the season, I'm looking at it like, okay, so 2/3 of the left side is Ryan Graves and Matt Grzelcyk.
Yeah.
And that doesn't sound all that great to me. On the surface,
I think what confuses me the most is like the Sergei Gonchar and Paul Martin experiences have put this expectation in people's heads that if a defenseman's bad the first year, he's going to be good the second year. It's like almost like an automatic. And like my thing is this is like even if Ryan Graves were to perform back to what his level was in New Jersey, is that good enough? Like I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. Like I don't know the answer to that question. I think given the current makeup of the team, probably not. Right? I don't think so. So, he's another one of those players, though, that like they've put in a situation where he loves carrying the puck. He loves shooting. He's never come across a shot he didn't like. And now he's in a pairing with Erik Karlsson. Good luck finding the time to do any of those things. Like when he's on the ice, it's not going to happen. Even if it's Chris Letang, it's still not going to happen, right? Like you're still playing with either way. You're playing with a generational puck moving defenseman. When it was John Marino, he could do it all day long, right? Like John Marino didn't care, but these guys are not John Marino. And unfortunately for him, that turns his role into Marcus Pettersson. He has to be Marcus Pettersson. He has, I want to be clear, 0 Marcus Pettersson skills. None, not the gap control, like maybe the skating, like I'll give him that. Right. But like you look at the situations he was put in last year and people are like, oh my God, he's getting eaten alive. Yeah. You're asking your dog to meow. Like that is what you're doing, and he's not doing a good job of it because he can't meow. He's a dog, So, but then the problem becomes, would you put him on the third pairing? At that contract, you can't, right? You cannot play him on the third pairing at that contract. I mean, you could, I guess, but then like you're eating a lot of money. I think potential lost value on managing his minutes in a bad way. So it's a tough situation, right? It's a tough situation. You're not going to try to ask Karlsson and Letang to give more to him. I mean, I just don't think that's going to work. And he's not defensively adept enough to handle the situations he end up with when they do their pinching and they go on their spiritual journeys in the offensive zone.
Spiritual journeys. I love it.
I love the way you describe it, because I look at the Penguins defense, and they're set up in the way of one offensive pair, one defensive pair, like, and not the pair itself or the different pairs, but like you have one offensive and one defensive. I feel like on the Penguins, and whether he's on a pairing with Letang or Erik Karlsson, it's not going to work because he's not a defensive guy. Like he's just not built enough to be, like you were saying, Marcus Pettersson.
He's not built like that.
It's I looked at that before Cat Friendly died. By the way, if they bought him out, and they're not going to. I mean, I know Kyle Dubas has said vocally he does not like to buy out players, but if they did buy him out, he would be on the books until 2035, the end of the 2034, 2035 season.
So, Tyler, what you're saying is there's no chance that they're going to cut him? Smitty from around the 412 here, and while I may not have much hair, the hair that I do have will not be cut by anybody besides Keek at Keek's Barbershop. My friend Christian Circle, been with us since day one. Keek's Barbershop, located 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Download the app The Cut, book an appointment with Christian today, or you can do walk-in with Tony or Ashley. But again, Keek's Barbershop, 401 Burkitch Way, Suite 2 in Beaver, PA. Go check them out. Old school vibe in there. Absolutely love it. Cannot recommend them enough. Wouldn't go anywhere else. Maybe I'll see you there. There you go. 2 of 3 down.
Dude, you're watching like Game 7 Max Talbot right now.
Speaking of defensemen, they
brought
brought back
show that we just recorded.
Yeah. Breaking the fourth wall here on the Pirates episode that we just recorded. We did not play a single, like we literally just started talking about baseball and didn't play a single one of those until the very end.
He's blacked out.
Yeah, which happens from time to time. But anyways, the Penguins bring back one of their own on the back end, Ryan Shea, coming back on a 1-year, 2-way contract. Just depth at this point, maybe the 7th defenseman for this team. But what did you make? Because Ryan Shea got some time last year, obviously at the NHL level. What did you make of his game? Is he maybe a guy that if Graves does struggle again, we could see, or if Grzelcyk does struggle down the stretch, we could see, or maybe even like you're saying at the trade deadline if he were moved?
I think that Ryan Shea has like a lot of good base skills, right? Like he's a good athlete, but I think he's got to get better at playing under duress. That's where he's really struggling in the pro level and the NHL level anyway, is under duress. Like I'm talking again, odd man rush situations where he's got the Penguins, the defensive system is very fluid, right? They're going to overload the side of the ice that the puck's on. And that responsibilities in there sometimes get a little blurry in terms of where someone, especially if the play's shifting from one side of the ice to the other, you got to kind of think on the fly and make reads. And I think he kind of like froze up there a lot last year and ended up in no man's land, not really doing anything and getting lost in the fray. So there's something there, right? Like I'm not mad that he's back. I think especially if he's going to start the year, he's going to start the year in the AHL. That gives them the opportunity to kind of like continue to groom and refine some of that and work with him specifically on that stuff. Because I think if you can figure that out, he's a good 6'7". He's a decent 6'7" that can move the puck and not handle it like a grenade. You just got to, when people are breathing down his neck and he's working it out of the zone, there's too many hope plays, right? He's too good of a puck mover to be banking it backhand off the wall or throwing it up the middle or just turning it over. I think there's a lot of that comes with time for some people, right? It comes with time for some people, and it trial by fire is sometimes the best way to do it. So I think the more time he gets, the better. I don't think you rely on him for much, but I think there may be something in there that you potentially extract a good puck moving performance from him every once in a while.
Yeah, I was intrigued by some of what I saw last year. I didn't necessarily look at him and think this is, an NHL regular, at least within the top 4, that type of potential. But certainly in the third pairing, he could definitely carve out a role for himself. I'm very upset with Tyler for this next one because he sat on this podcast and predicted that the Penguins were going to sign Anthony Beauvillier. They then went and signed Anthony Beauvillier. Jesse, what do you got?
I just don't know what kind of player he is anymore. I think he had a pretty decently discernible identity a while ago with the Islanders. You knew what you would get out of him. I think he got shipped around. His role got elevated a little bit and it kind of crumbled from there. I think as that ice time grew for him, like he didn't expound on it at all. It didn't seem like he was really earning it as he moved forward. And then last year was an identity. That's where I get the identity-less year for him. Like, I don't think they understood how to deploy him. And I think you found him getting deployed in a number of different roles in a number of different ways. And it's sort of like they all just mushed together. And I went back and looked at some of the tape and like the core stuff that you would like about him is still there, right? I think it's still on display. I just don't think that it's, I don't think they ever found a home for him. And I think that if in this situation, saying you're discernibly a part of this bottom 6, we are rebuilding this bottom 6, we want you to do this. I think like that you again, maybe you get a decent performance out of there, right? But if he gives you what he gave you last year, you're probably going to be pretty disappointed.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't
Tyler,
think he will either, by the way. I think that's like a really low bar, right? That's a really low bar. And I think he's better. He's a better player than that, I think. But again, I think there's some direction for him that's needed here to get him back to what he was when he was in New York.
So in your mind, if you look at the way that the roster is currently constructed with, like, who does he need to play with to get the most out of him?
Yeah, so here's the thing. Kevin Hayes is a really good puck mover. I've mentioned this already, right? And I think that if you can get him on a line with a guy like maybe Hayes and a Puustinen, where he gets to do some of the mail carrying, he gets to go into the boards and get in front of the net and eat space up. I think that's a really good spot for him. I think even playing with like a Lars Eller and a Noel Acciari, I think he'd be fine. I just let him. His best role is on the forecheck, causing a little bit of chaos, getting to good scoring areas, being a guy who's going to breathe down your neck and make you think twice about what you're doing. And I think that's what they've been missing in the bottom 6. I think they haven't really had that at all. I question how good he is defensively right now. That's where I think an area where it was really rough for him last year was there wasn't a lot of engagement. But again, that's the anomaly, right? Like, I don't think that's the usual. I think that's just what he's coming from. So I'm not sure what's in there. I'm not sure what to expect. I don't think my expectations are like super high, but again, if we're talking guys about comparisons to the prior bottom 6,
yeah,
like again, like I feel like he's going to give you more than Matt Nieto did, right? I think
sure.
He's got more in there than that. So again, it's an improvement, but I don't know that it's the improvement they need to change the overall trajectory of their team right now.
Well, let me throw this name in there then, just as we continue to talk about the bottom 6. I actually kind of like the player here and like the signing, but I'm confused with how much bottom 6 guys that it seems like we already have, and also getting 2 years. Blake Lizotte, 2-year deal, $3.7 million. I kind of like the player. I don't mind the fit necessarily for Sullivan in this team, but I'm just trying to figure out the spot for him.
Yeah. A couple friends from mine up in Toronto once told me they told me the phrase that Kyle Dubas loved to sign cardio merchants. I thought that was like super funny.
Yeah, there you go.
It's true though, and I think like, but this is not that like this is the one I think everybody should be excited about. To be completely honest with you, It's like they've signed a younger player, right? Like first of all, like the claps for that. I think that this is the one guy that if you want to play that 2016 style. Like, this is the guy you would bring in, right? Like, he fits that bill. And sometimes this gets him in trouble. I hate when coaches take talented players with good hands and try to put a wet towel on them, right? But I think in his case, sometimes he gets a little carried away. Like, and you'll see, like, he'll get the notion, I'm going to go 1-on-4 in this situation. A lot of coaches are going to punish you for that. And they're going to limit your ice time, and they're going to tell you not to do that anymore. And I think there's a happy medium that has to be found here, right? But like, this is the kind of player you should be signing for your bottom six, right? Younger, fast, can play crash and bang hockey, just go get the puck, and has decent, like surprising hands that every once in a while pop out and make you go like, "Whoa, who is that? Like, how did he do that?" You get a little bit of that every once in a while. So I thought that was the one that I think probably was the best bit of business they did post draft, over the free agency period.
Yeah,
I'm okay with the term on there too, right? Like 2 years, fine with me, right? Like, if this is another one of those players, Smitty, where if like he does really well, and let's say he goes on this bender and scores 15 plus, you could get something probably for him at the deadline, and that there's an extra year there as an incentive. It's not a rental, right? So maybe that brings you back a little bit of a better something in terms of picks or prospects or whatever it is, right? Probably picks.
Sure.
But I think that he's another one I'm keeping my eye on to say like maybe this is a fluid situation where they're hoping they strike gold here and they can turn it into something. Yeah.
Absolutely. Is there anybody else? I mean, going back through talk about minor transactions now, not necessarily ones we have to spend a whole lot of time on, but Sebastian Aho, the other Sebastian Aho, Emil Bemstrom is back. Jimmy Huntington on a 2-way contract. Nathan Clerman on a 2-way contract. Like anything within those guys that you wanted. I mean, the other Sebastian Aho has obviously played some time in the NHL, somewhat familiar with him, obviously from his time with the Islanders.
Yeah,
familiar with Bemstrom from last year.
Depth. Yeah, you like that depth. So yeah, no complaints from that. I'm just not expecting much. Yeah.
Do you think that that Bemstrom will just be like, are we going to see him at the NHL level within the bottom six, or is he like the 13th forward, maybe at the AHL level even?
They seem to like him a little bit for whatever reason at the end of the year. Mike Sullivan seemed to have somewhat of an affinity for him. So to me, he's the 13th forward very clearly. Like if you were to like look, if you're listing all the forwards out from the perspective of skill, he's my 13th forward. I don't know if they see him like that. I hope not. But again, it's not somebody that's going to kill you every night, right? Like I don't think he was completely useless. I think he's just extremely limited in what he can do. And I'm, not necessarily as a and we're talking about bottom six talent here, right? But like, sure. I think if you look at some of the guys that might be surrounding him out there, I don't know that he necessarily fits in, so to speak. Like if Lars Eller is your fourth line center, I don't know that those two make any sense together for me.
That's fair. Yeah. And I also we keep talking about guys within the bottom six. I don't want to just clog that up with like this type of player either. I want to keep spots open for those prospects that you're talking about to be able to come up and get their feet wet at the NHL level. So
they are, they definitely are Smitty taking the meat grinder approach to this, right? Like give us as many warm bodies as we can possibly get, and we're going to find some that work eventually. I think and you kind of have to do that. Like when you inherit such a bad situation and you're so limited, I think in terms of the pool of player that you can sign in the summer, I think that might be the best way to do it. Just give me the mass amount of warm bodies that you have, and we'll file through them until we find something that we can run for a while.
Yeah, that's fair. It certainly looks that way. Go ahead.
I was going to say the one thing I appreciate about this free agency as opposed to past free agencies and even last year is that outside of the Lizotte signing, every single one was 1 year. Yeah, they didn't hamstring themselves.
That's where, look at we talked about the Graves contract, right? Like that really hurt them, I think, eventually. I think that term might even be one of the reasons that they weren't able to potentially get any suitors for him, is a scarce desire for that level of commitment. So, but that's a good bit of business, like you said, to go out there and not make any really serious commitments. Hopefully Sidney Crosby is the only one that you make that's for term beyond 2 years. But I think that I prefer that to, trying to entice people over here with multi-year attached to a lower salary.
Speaking of the Sid contract, before we get into the draft, what do you make of that? How long do you think the contract's going to be as far as term? Do you think he wants to go out at the same time as Letang or Gino, or do you think
I don't think he's married to that? Yeah. Here's what I always think. And nobody's told me this. I'm just giving you this is just my gut instinct, right? Like he's punted a lot of stuff, life stuff, right? He's not married yet, right? Kids, family, all that stuff. That's all been punted. I think he's waiting to do all that stuff. He's waiting until he's done. And for that reason, I don't think he'll go for a long time. I think he's going to go until, so I think 3-4 years, maybe for me. 3 would probably be what I would expect on this deal. And then we see where it goes after that to play till 40, right? And see what happens. That's my guess. That's my gut. Is I just think that he's too like laser focused on hockey.
He's
for
married
good
to the
reason.
game.
Yeah, married to the game, exactly. And until that time comes that he's over with it, I think he's foregoing, whatever comes next for him.
Do you think that he'll break his
3?
I thought I saw the contract term being thrown around with the idea of like 3 years, 10 million per. Do you think he breaks his 8.7 mil per average? Like out of superstition, do you think he'd even want to break it?
I don't know. That's a good question. I haven't really thought about that. I guess I expected him to break it. My expectation was that he would, and that he would go with a higher number for a shorter term that he deserves, by the way. But then again, like this dude, like we're talking about somebody who like picks their legs up off the floor of the bus whenever they go over railroad tracks. So like, I'm not sure that he cares much about that extra money at this point. I think he's probably doing all right for himself.
Jesse, the last thing that we wanted to bring up was obviously the draft. And on our last show, very like we don't try to run from this or hide from it. Tyler and I not that deep into the NHL draft. That's why you're on here to talk with us about it. So, it seems like pretty overwhelmingly, I would say, at least within the people that I follow on the Twitter sphere, relatively pleased with what the Penguins came out of the draft weekend with. A little bit of confusion with their 4th round pick. Was a guy that wasn't even at the draft, already 20 years old. Not necessarily much of a prospect. But what did you make of the draft haul overall and any players individually that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, I thought they did so well with Brunick and Howe that they probably just made fart noises in the mic for the rest of the day, and I'd have been okay with it. I'll start like with Brunick, I think especially because you're starting to see the clips of him at prospect camp and how well he moves, and people are like, "Whoa, like how did this happen?" He got hurt. That's how it happened. He's playing on just a totally terrible team where he was the only good player. He was the breakout. That was their plan. Give it to Brunick. That's how it happened. Like it. So then he got boarded pretty badly at the beginning of February, and I hurt his shoulder. And all the hype he was building, just right, like went in the toilet a little bit. And then he came back in time to play the U18 Worlds and went to a Team Canada situation where he was asked to play a much different game than he's used to. I think he's a puck-carrying defenseman by nature. I think that's what he's really good at. And Canada said, no, you're going to penalty kill. You're going to play defensive defenseman. And he did it really well, to the point that people were like, forgot about him. Like Roddy was hurt, So then his stock sort of like relifted again. And he almost, for me, I didn't think he was going to be around then. I thought somebody was going to look at his size and his skating and be like, I don't care how bad his team was. Give me that kid. And it's just kind of like shocked when he was there. And I think that's one I'm really excited about. And I think he's going to go back next year. He'll go back to it'll be a bad team again. It'll be slightly better. Maybe it'll be a little bit better than it was last year. But I think he's going to have the opportunity next year to show you what he's all about in terms of like just being able to do it by himself. He's just a bigger Paul Martin. He's a bigger, stronger Paul Martin.
Just gonna ask. I mean, I don't know how. I know that you throw out some comps here and there. I know there's a lot of people that try to steer away from that, but I was going to ask if you had one.
That's it for me, man. I'm not saying he's the next Paul Martin. Don't hold my hand to the fire like that, but that's who he reminds me of, right?
So his first year in Pittsburgh is going to be bad.
Yeah, and it'll be good after that. Yeah, just like Ryan Graves. So, but that was a surprise to me. And then the other one was I think people in Pittsburgh are really, really going to like Tanner Howe, and I've wanted to go a little bit deeper on some of their later round picks, but I keep going back to watch for Tanner Howe to compile more tape on him because he's just an angry individual. Not the biggest forward of all time, decent size, but he plays bigger than he is. Came into this year in a sort of unique situation because he played with Connor Bedard the year before. He was Connor Bedard's winger, and his inflated point totals, and they were inflated, were like people were like, it's a product of Bedard, right? He's a product of Bedard. Bedard will be gone next year. I don't think he's going to be as good, and he was as good. Regina wasn't very good either. They were not a great hockey team, and he shouldered a lot of the load himself. He was the captain, wore the C for them at a very young age, and he's the kind of player who will like lose control of the puck just so he can steamroll you, right? Like he wants to run you over. I posted a couple clips on The Athletic of him destroying someone, taking the puck, and then immediately setting up a goal. And I think the scouts say, this is what they say. that he doesn't have like this popping offensive game, right? Like his offensive game doesn't pop. Okay, scoring chance creation, 90th percentile CHL forwards last year on Mitch Brown's track data. Can you not have offensive skills that pop and be in the 90th percentile of offensive chances, like scoring chances created at the CHL level? I just don't think you can. I'm sorry, that's nonsensical to me, especially when your team's bad and you're the go-to guy. What he showed me last year and what I'm seeing in the video is somebody who's very, very good at decision making in the offensive zone. Right? Do I need to hit this guy and blow them up and end their life? Do I need to make a really quick pass? Do I need to make a tic-tac-toe play? Should I shoot it? Like these. It's always the right call. And while there may not be one skill that he has offensively, I think the one thing he has is his one-timer. I think his one-timer from the circle is wicked. And it's something he seemed to really double down on this year. And because I feel like he heard the criticism of Tanner Howell doesn't have this go-to offensive skill. And he's like, all right, well, watch this. And became like the trigger man on the power play and scored a lot of goals from the circle on the power play. People generally say he's underwhelming. He's this, to me, I don't see that. I see a very low risk prospect. I think the worst case scenario for Tanner Howell is he absolutely terrorizes the bottom six for a team and more, maybe like a Brandon Tanev like fashion. And I think his ceiling is like a Chris Kunitz. I think he's the kind of guy who can go in there.
I saw somebody throw out Brendan Gallagher.
I'd take that. I think maybe his skills, offensive skills, a little bit more refined. And he's sees and understands the game at a better hockey IQ is the word we'll use probably. But people in Pittsburgh are going to love him. He's the kind of guy who his mouth never stops on the ice. He hits people and then looks at them and talks about it, right? Like while they're down. He's in the scrum, people are rubbing the glove in his face, he's laughing at them, right? He's on the bench, like rallying. You could see him visibly like getting the guys going on the bench. Like he's young. That's the thing, he's a young player. So I'm excited about it. I think this was a safe pick for me. I didn't put him on my endorsement list because I was talking with a bunch of guys over the graphics. There's no way. There's just no way he's going. I had him at 35th best player in the draft. I did not think that he would be available when the Penguins picked. I was shocked that he was. So I think it worked out really well. I think the last one I'll mention, Max Swanson is getting a lot of hype because his NHL, his NHLE numbers, the equivalency numbers that project whether or not someone's going to be a star are really high. He scored a lot of points last year. I have real big questions about his skating. And for somebody his size, like a smaller forward, he's like, let's be honest, he's 5'6". He doesn't have the skating to me that's going to allow him to separate. My friend Mike Farkas, who's the coach at NYU, men's NYU hockey, told me that there are 1,100 forwards that have been drafted and over the course of the last, I don't know how many years it's been, 16 of them have made it at under 5'7" into the NHL. 16 have made it into the NHL under 5'7" of 1,100 forwards drafted. So the odds are definitely against this kid, like 100%. But I'm going to be clear, when you watch him on video, like the stuff he can do in terms of like setting plays up, shooting the puck, distributing the puck, keeping the puck, keeping defensemen guessing and what he's going to do next with his hands. Ridiculous, stupid, insane, outrageous. But I don't see him going in the middle a lot. And I definitely can't understand why at his size he's not faster. That's just really weird to me. It's his stride is disbalanced in staccato. And when you watch somebody like Braden Point, who's not 5'6", but he's a smaller forward, he has that bump, right? That immediate go, right? Those short legs allow him to just burst. And Max Swanson does not have that yet. But I don't want to be like the Debbie Downer here, but I think a lot of people are looking at the data side of it and being like, oh, this dude's, but this is a good home run swing. This is
That's
the
what I
pick
say. Might as well throw this dart in the 7th round. Yeah,
absolutely right. Absolutely right. Because there's no one else in the 7th round's got those hands. Flat out. Yeah. They don't. And if he could figure the rest of it out, like
207th overall. I know you follow him on Twitter as well. Patrick Bacon had him as his number 21 player.
Yeah.
Like absolutely loved him. So
Pat's big on scoring rates being really good precursors to future success. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. You really can't dispute it, to be frank with you. Right. But I don't know what weight he's giving to the league. I don't know what, if there's any of that.
Yeah, sure.
But look, I mean, he's in for me anyway, if you're tiering playmakers out of this draft, I would probably put him at the bottom end of like the A tier of playmakers, but I don't put the rest of his game anywhere near that.
Very fair.
So do you think his height is why he's a 7th rounder?
And the skating.
Yeah.
But do you think that would have been overlooked if he wasn't as short as he is? Or no?
No, it's that noticeable. Yeah. It's the first, I mean, when I didn't know anything about him, I knew that he'd gotten invited. The USA was going to invite him to their camp for U18s. And I recognized the name. But the first thing I saw when I watched him was like, what is that? what is going on? You know, I don't understand this. And
That's the first thing I saw when I watched Wyan Graves.
But I had to go and ask other like people who were doing this for a living. Cause I'm not like, I felt like I was really struggling to explain what it was. I couldn't figure it out. And I finally talked to a couple, like, you know, again, some other people that are, you know, scouts at the ECHL level or in NCAA level. And they all said the same thing. It's just too short. It's not, there's not enough extension. It's disbalanced. And I think when I started to like get the tips from them, I was like, okay, I could see that now, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Just, I knew that for that size, that what I was seeing was not what I was expecting at all. And it's not an agility thing. It's a top speed thing. That's really what it is. It's solely not having that top speed to create that separation. You almost need that when you're 5'6", right? Like that's almost a prerequisite.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But again, as Jesse said, you know, doesn't want to be a Debbie Downer. Certainly worth them taking the shot.
Take the swing. Absolutely. I take that swing every
No.
time. I don't even think twice about it.
Go ahead, Tyler. You have something else?
I was going to say, I have a couple things to ask Jesse. I know we've kept you for an hour now, and I appreciate
this
your
is
time.
our Penguins podcasts are typically a half hour. So just to give you a little bit of reference.
At least during the off season.
Yeah.
But we've talked about prospects now. We've talked about free agency now. So I kind of want to wedge that into a question. So Kyle Dubas has the interesting task of making the team better to compete while also improving the terrible farm system that they had and improving the future. One, how do you think he's doing at that job a year in? Because he's over a year now as the Penguins GM, president of hockey ops, everything. And if you were Kyle Dubas, how would you approach this? Maybe it's the same as he's doing, maybe it's differently, but what would you do?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna give you 2 grades. I'm gonna give you a organizational development grade, and I'll give you a competitiveness grade. Organizational development, I give him a B. And he's done a pretty good job of rebuilding the structure of this organizational prospect pool. Has made some pretty savvy moves to do it. I think his draft picks have been really solid. Competitiveness, I got to give him a D because they haven't made the playoffs, and I don't think they're going to this year in their current state either. I think I would have preferred to see them punt even further down the road because they haven't done anything, in my opinion, that changes the poor outcome of the post Crosby, Malkin, and Letang era. Right? You've not created an environment that you're immediately going to pivot out of once they all retire. Like that is not the case. It will not. I don't think it will be the case. Right, by the time that day comes, because you're so far behind the 8 ball on organizational depth and prospect pool stuff, right? Look at what the Capitals are doing right now, right? They are reloading, right? They are trying to go for it, and I don't think they're good enough to do it. I don't think they're good enough right now in their current state to win a Stanley Cup, but I think they're going to make the playoffs. I think they're good enough to make the playoffs. I would have almost preferred in my own, I'm not the GM, but you asked me what I wanted to see. I would have nucleared the Hextall post-Extall era, just like Dubas did. I thought that was great. And I thought the Carlson move was really the nuclear button on that because he jettisoned so many problems in that one move that I felt like it really set him up to make a good run. He got some players that didn't work out. And I feel like they punted too soon, right? I feel like now you're in a limbo where you're trying to do 2 things that can't be done simultaneously, right? Your desire to grab picks and prospects has precluded you from participating in most of the activities that bring players to a city, right? Like you're not going out and making trades. You're not sacrificing picks and prospects to go get players. That has made you a team that can only do hockey trades, right? They have to be 1-to-1 hockey trade deals, and those are limited in scope. You know, there's only so many of those to go around every year. I don't think you've obviously not replaced Jake Gensel at all. That's one of the largest parts of your offense. I don't understand what the goal is, right? Because if we all agree that we're looking at like 3-4 years of Crosby max, you've not, in my opinion, you haven't like steered the boat around far enough to be re-competitive at the twilight of that 3rd or 4th year, right? Like it's not going to be that quick of a turnaround. I kind of feel like we're, you're kind of just stagnant now, right? Like you're a team that's still not good enough to make the playoffs, and you're preparing for a future that is sacrificing the present. If that makes sense, right? Like you want to curate this post Crosby, Malkin, and Letang era, but you're doing it at the expense of the current Crosby, Malkin, and Letang era. And I just feel like if you want to be competitive, there's only one way to do it right now, and it's with picks and prospects. And I don't, you're not going out in free agency, and you don't have the cap environment to be able to go out in free agency and throw like these. You couldn't even get Vladimir Tarasenko because you were so cap strapped, right? Yeah. So like, you see what I'm saying? It's just the hesitance to do a cannonball into the pool and say like, hell with it, we're just gonna do it. We're going all in. If I'm Sidney Crosby, I definitely have at least some questions. I definitely have some questions for the management group in terms of like, what are we doing? Okay, I want to re-sign this contract, and then what's going to happen? Like, what's the immediate plan? Like, where are we headed from here? I think those are questions that he's dying for the answers to.
I would never blame him for something like this, but is it partially Malkin, Sid, Letang's fault that the Penguins are in the pickle that they are because they have not declined at all?
No, it's the incompetence of the management that got them to this point. The Ron Hextall was that bad, and he saddled them with so many just untenable situations that rotted the supporting cast around the group and forced them to have to carry the load. I think Kyle Dubas tried really hard to fix that. Couldn't do it. It was too hard. And here we are trying to fix it again a year and a half later.
Do you trust Kyle Dubas still? I don't know. Obviously, I know it's very early, but do you think he is the right guy to do it?
I don't feel as strongly about Kyle Dubas as I once did. I think when he came in here, I wouldn't say that I am distrustful of him. Again, I'm not sure what the end goal is with this, right? We're trying to have our cake and eat it too. And there's only, the window is pretty much crack closed. We've got this much space left before it shuts. So I would like to see more potential aggression from him to maximize on that time before the thing is closed. But soft pivots rarely ever work in hockey, right? They rarely ever work. And I feel like, you think about back to a couple years ago where the Rangers had to write a letter to everybody and say, like, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to handle it. We're going to blow it up. Right. I feel like we're doing that. That's happening now without the letter.
I thought it was brilliant.
Right? I think the Penguins are in that stage right now, but they're not writing. They're actually trying to ignore that it's happening. They're in the same phase, but we're not getting that letter. And we're still going into this year with this anticipation of qualifying for the postseason.
I thought what the Rangers did a few years ago was awesome because I would appreciate that a franchise would tell their fan base that and just be open about the situation that they got themselves into. And I kind of relate it to, I've said this a lot about pretty much any sport, but I talk about it a lot with the Steelers, that being in the middle of the road is not going to improve your team at all. You either need to tear it down or you need to do something drastic to improve your team right now. And I feel like that's kind of where I'm at with the Penguins. And what sucks, and like I just said, I can't blame them for this, but it's like, how are you going to openly tank whenever you have Sidney Crosby as over a point per game player still? Those two things just don't exist together. And it just makes it even worse from a management standpoint. How do you balance it out? And then when you're Dubas taking over what was already a terribly run franchise, trying to fix that at the same time while also trying to make the team better from a future standpoint and a present standpoint. It seems like an almost impossible task.
Agree.
I also agree. All right. Well, Jesse, this has been, like I said, 2 episodes baked into one, basically. Tell the people where they could find you.
Yeah. So over at The Athletic for Penguin-centric materials, and then at McKeens Hockey for NHL-centric materials.
There we go. I don't think we have anything else either. We obviously appreciate your time. This was a bit longer of an episode. Everybody be sure to check out the links in the description. Everything Custom Designs, one of our sponsors. If you want to get some t-shirts, some hoodies, long sleeves, she does hats now as well of ours. The direct link will be down below. Game Changers or Pick 6, save yourself $10 on your order using code AT412. And also, since our last episode, kicked off Rockin' Around the 412. So the link for that will be in the description as well. Run that up until probably 2 weeks before Christmas. Why do we start that in July? My mom's idea. Christmas in July, I guess, has always kind of been a thing that she did. So she said that we should start it then. And we also have already raised $300 for the mission this year. So we appreciate that. Follow us everywhere at Around the 412. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all that good stuff. Subscribe right here on YouTube. Leave us a like, hit us in the comments, hit that notification bell. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. You can find Around the 412. Smitty for Tyler. Thanks again to Jesse Marshall for joining the show. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.